right. And I think we are now live. And I see Cliff and Chris and Ilva. Um, okay, and Ilva's heading out to the cabin in the woods. Um, isn't that sounds vaguely scary, but I'll just let that go. Hi, hello everybody. Nice to see you, virtually or otherwise. Well, virtually, because that's the only way any of us are seeing each other right at the moment. Good to have you here. It's Sunday. I've had a long and somewhat difficult weekend, so not to complain. Hello, Maria Jose. Excuse me. Anyway, just to let you know, I'm a little fragmented tonight. And Holger. Hello, Holger. Let me show you my T-shirt. I'm very pleased with it. It's my Wicked Tribe T-shirt. One of the things I insisted on getting when we did merchandise. I said I must have a Wicked T-shirt, a Wicked Tribe T-shirt, and in fact, it was made by. The art was done by a friend of our daughter's, so I was very pleased that we were able to do that. Anyway, yes, hello, Nicholas. Hello, Jeremy. Okay, so what's going on tonight? Hi, Sean. Yes, I know what time it is. What a silly question. Good God, my weekends are dominated by these readings, so I always know what time it is and what readings I still have to do, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so tonight I am going to finish reading God Rest Ye Merry Gentle Pig, although you should be able to hear the comma in there, because as with the original song, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, it is actually, there's a comma in there. It's God rest ye merry, comma, gentlemen, meaning God keep you merry. And so this is God rest ye merry, comma, gentle pig. As, well, those of you who heard the first half know that there's a pig in it of sorts, a werepig. But, you know, if you don't know that, you'll still pick it up because the werepig, George the werepig, makes an appearance in the later part of this story as well. So anyway, so that's what I'm doing. I'm going to be finishing that story off tonight, and I am glad to have y'all with me. And I suppose I could just jump right in. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I need to say. Not particularly. We're all still in the same situation. We're still watching the foolishness of people, especially in our own country here in the States, that, you know, in terms of this flippin' pandemic and people's, to me, incomprehensible unwillingness to just wear a mask, get it dealt with, so we can get back to something like normal life. And instead, what we've had, of course, is people hurrying back into normal life, in part because they were encouraged to by their government, and you know, these horrible upsurges in infections everywhere. So we're okay. We're doing our best to keep that way. I hope y'all are okay too. I know some of you are actually living in countries where it's not that much of an issue at the moment because you actually took care of it early on. So, and there's Ron. Hi, Ron, and Dirk. Hello, Dirk. And anyway, but we're still struggling here very badly in the States, and even California, which did a pretty good job, in part because of the recalcitrance of certain folks, especially in Southern California. But I'm sure there's people everywhere who have flouted that, and even some people who, you know, that they pushed the government into allowing some things to start back up again, and that has proved unfortunate. So it's not entirely the fault of all the people, although there's a lot of blame to be passed around. And those of us who, you know, are camped out at home and wearing masks and doing all that stuff are very, very, very tired of watching other people complain about how unfair it is to them, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I refuse to give in to that sort of negativity at the moment. So what I am hoping is that all of you, my sensible friends, are taking good care, and that you are helping those around you to get through this. And we've been through worse, folks. So let's not act like children. Let's do what needs to be done, and let's get through it And the sooner that we do, the sooner we can have people back to work, businesses open again, things like that. But you know, if we keep having these surges, that's not even dealing with the other problems that there are, like mutations in the virus and et cetera, like, you know, all that other stuff. That's just what we can do ourselves now to make it better. So thank you, all of you out there who have this, the good sense and the kindness toward others, especially vulnerable people, to do what should be done. And with that, I am going to let that subject fly, at least fly away for a while, and I am going to go back to reading God Rest Ye Merry Gentle Pig, a Bobby Dollar Christmas story. So very quickly, for those who didn't tune in last week, I will just update you by telling you Bobby Dollar is an earthbound angel whose angel name is Deloriel. He lives in an imaginary city, a composite city of the places where I grew up, called San Judas, which has sort of replaced San Jose as the other major city in the San Francisco Bay Area. Sorry, San Jose, but I needed a place that was urban, but was where I grew up, and I actually grew up in the suburbs, so I turned it into an imaginary city. Anyway, so that's where Bobby Dollar lives. That's where he hangs with his angel friends, and a few non-angels as well, like the aforementioned werepig. But anyway, and he was doing his job, which is acting as an advocate for the newly dead, and the guy he was representing, who had just died, was a very old man named Peter Kosic, if I remember the name correctly. And Vesic, sorry, I knew I had something wrong there. Peter Vesic, who had been a former Yugoslavian freedom fighter, had been a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp where he had been experimented on. Because of that, had become a werewolf. And but his thing was, he was telling the heavenly judge, I guess, you know, I don't care, throw the book at me, send me to hell. I've done it all. I've done terrible things, but save my grandchild who has been, or save my son and my grandchild who has been kidnapped by this crazy Nazi scientist, Uberhardt, who is also a werewolf. So Bobby, along with his werepig friend George and George's two helpers, he's left George in the truck because George at night is a werepig. He's a pig with he was cheated by hell. So he's instead of being a pig half the time and a person half the time he's a person in a pig's body, and the other half the time he's a pig in a person's body. So he's been kind of roundly screwed every which way. Anyway, George is along for the ride because Bobby is dealing with were creatures, and he figures somewhere up the line he's going to need George's help. But he's gone into this house where the doctor, up in the hills above San Judas, he's gone into this house where the doctor lives, and is trying to sneak in, and has just been clocked on the head by one of the two guards, and is now in the hands of, well, I'll start here and read the last couple paragraphs from where I stopped last week. So this is Bobby talking. Bobby narrates the whole thing. It's his voice all the way through. And he has just come to, tied to a chair with duct tape, and with one of the guy who clubbed him, but also with his real captor, Dr. Uberhardt, who we are now going to hear about. So, continuing with God Rest Ye Merry Gentle Pig. Look, I've seen as many stupid movies as you have. I know what Nazi scientists are supposed to look like. Lean, cruel, maybe with a scar. What they are definitely not supposed to look like was jolly old Saint Nick. But the guy smiling at me had the round, red cheeks, the full white beard, the friendly, jelly-jiggling belly. Further departing from the approved model, the Hollywood model of scientific Nazihood, he was wearing not a blood-stained lab coat or an SS uniform, but a pair of red-striped pajamas, an expensive red bathrobe, and fur-lined slippers. I, on the other hand, was in a chair, wearing only my pants. My ankles had been duct taped, and my hands were secured tightly behind my back, too. I was pretty sure they'd already decided I was naughty, not nice. I cleared my throat. Dr. Uberhardt, I presume. He held up my wireless earbud. Who is on the other end of this? Who sent you? He had a bit of a Germanic accent, so I was pretty sure that this was the monster of Mauthausen in person, although he looked awfully damn good for 103. Tell me quickly, and perhaps you'll get a bullet in the head and a quick death. His eyes were the only part that didn't look like something out of an old Coca-Cola ad, glinting little flecks of blue that might be the last color you saw before hitting Arctic water under the ice. What a lovely gift idea, I said. You're clearly in the seasonal mood. The earbud crackled in his fingers, so low I wasn't sure if anyone heard it but me. Old angel ears. I heard a distorted moment of George's voice saying, Bobby! Then Uberhardt crushed the earbud between his thumb and index finger like it was a fragile blown glass ornament. Centenarians shouldn't be that strong. Well, you won't need that anymore, Bobby, he said, and dropped a small shower of plastic fragments on the carpet. I was testing my bonds, duct tape, which is always nasty, but not impossible. Even with my angel-eyed body, I couldn't just snap it. They wound it around my ankles and wrists several times, but I'd found what felt like a loose screw head on the back of the chair seat. So I began sawing the edge of the tape that held my wrists against it and talked to cover the moment. Season's greetings from Petar Vesich. Petar Vesich died yesterday. You no longer have an employer. Some deals last longer than you'd think. Vesich wants his grandson Anthony back. Santa Nazi raised an eyebrow and his smile widened. Is that all? You can find him buried in a shallow grave out by the south fence. My heart felt cold in my chest. From the offhand way Uberhardt said it, I knew it had to be true. I took what I wanted from him a long time ago. In a sense, Vesich already has him back. Damn, now I really wanted to kill this bastard. If I could ever get free. I felt the edge of the outermost strip of tape part where I was working it. I'd have to tear through a lot more before I'd be able to do anything, though, and even if I got loose, what was I going to do? My guns were gone somewhere with my jacket, shirt, and shoes. All they had left me seemed to be Petar Vesich's silver bullet, which I could feel pressing against my leg in my thigh pocket. Of course, without the Colt revolver, still buried in the hospital garden, it was quite useless, unless I could somehow convince Uberhardt to swallow it and choke. I set to work trying to stretch the loop of tape around my ankles. They'd taped right over my pants, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. So you went to all that trouble to kidnap the man's grandson, then you just killed him? I asked. What was the point? I mean, I know you concentration camp doctors are all supposed to be crazy, but come on, that's just wasteful. Uberhardt got out of his chair and walked over to me. He leaned down and grabbed my face in his surprisingly strong fingers. No fucking way this guy was 40 years past retirement age, and dragged it up until I was staring into his bright blue eyes. Wasteful. Ha! Do we speak of things wasted? You are one of God's angels, and you spend your time on things like this that don't concern you. Or God. Okay, that surprised me. I lost the thread of wherever I'd been leading him. You know what I am? I have been around a long time. By the standards of mortal men, I have seen many things. Things even you might find hard to credit. Oh, yes, I have met your kind before. Uberhardt let go of my face and straightened up. I know you can die, or at least your body can. I know you can feel pain, and I am good at making people feel pain. Now, tell me why you are truly here. No angel would waste his time on a mongrel like Petar Vesich. I already told you. He nodded. Smokes, that's one of the two, his two helpers. Smokes leaned over and hit me hard with the back of his hand, hard enough to make my head buzz and my vision blur. Do not treat me like I am stupid, the doctor said. Tell me who truly sent you. Okay, you're right. It was the Festivus fairy, Mr. Claus. I think she's moving to your turf. He didn't even nod. This time Smokes hit me with the butt of the shotgun just beside my right eye. I was pretty sure my cheekbone was broken. Blood dribbled from my face onto my bare chest. The jolly old elf looked from me to the floor with distaste. We are going to make a mess here. My daughter spent much putting out the decorations. She would be upset if there's blood. We should take him downstairs to the lab. Carl's busy puking in the bathroom down there, said Smokes. I think he's got a concussion. We owe this guy for that, too. And he gave me another shot with the gun butt, this time on the back of my head and only slightly less vicious than the previous blow. I heard nothing but jingle bells for long seconds afterward. Some angel, he said. Look at him. You sure, Doc? I know the stink of sanctity, said Uberhardt. We will not take him upstairs because the boy is sleeping there. He turned toward me and said the following, like it was supposed to make sense. The boy needs his rest. He gets too excited and thinks he hears Santa Claus coming. Then he does not sleep. He turned to Smokes. Go and bring some towels to put on the carpet, Henry. So Scrounger was really Carl, Smokes was named Henry, and I was about to become a series of stains on some towels. I was learning things, but they weren't exactly the kind of things I wanted to learn. I felt another layer of the tape around my wrist come apart at the edge, but it still wasn't enough to let me do anything useful. I decided to concentrate on my legs for a while. As I mentioned, they had taped my ankles right over my pants. Dumb move, because duct tape doesn't hold fabric the way it does skin. I started trying to stretch the tape. Discreetly, of course, since Herr Dr. Santa was still sitting across from me. Meanwhile, I was putting together the bits of what I'd heard, and although I didn't know exactly what it all meant, I sure didn't like the shape of it. Uberhardt had a daughter. The daughter seemed to have a child. Vesich's grandson was dead, but he served his purpose first. Henry came back with a pile of fluffy white towels in his arms, like an ugly giant carrying clouds. I discreetly slowed down my work on the taped bonds as he bent to arrange them around me, but Henry's pockets were full of tools that looked like they belonged to a demented leather worker, and I didn't think he was going to be making toys, so I kept scraping at the tape around my wrists and desperately pushing my ankles apart to stretch the tape, like a thigh master exercise in reverse. Towels finally arranged beneath me to his satisfaction, like the blanket at the base of a particularly disturbing Christmas tree. The artist formerly known as Smokes stood up and began to gag me with a rank bandana. I was still a few seconds short of having made enough of a gouge in the tape around my wrist to snap it outright, but I was out of time. So, when Henry moved around in front of me, I tugged my pants leg out of the loosened duct tape. Not as easy as it sounds. Then kicked him right in his popcorn balls. My feet were bare, as I mentioned, and it felt like I broke my big toe, but I used the leverage of my seat in the chair to drive that kick so hard that I lifted Henry up onto his tiptoes with it. He fell like a bag of rocks. So far beyond useful speech, he only gagged and made little whistling noises. Feliz Navidad, fuckhole, is what I wanted to say, but I didn't waste the breath. My attack on Henry had caught Uberhardt by surprise, but the doctor was already fumbling in the end table beside his chair for what I felt certain was a gun, probably something cool and Nazi-ish, like a Luger that would blast me full of cool and Nazi-ish bullets. I heaved against the tape on my wrists as hard as I could, tensing every muscle in my arms, neck, and shoulders until they felt like swollen blood sausages. I shouted in agony, but finally snapped the bonds. Even as I did, I saw that Henry had recovered just enough from his ball booting to level his sawed-off toward me with one wobbly arm. I threw myself out of the chair and under his line of fire, bumping his arm with my shoulder to knock the blast up and out of line. It still went off next to my ear like a bomb, and I couldn't hear anything except a distant ringing as I got hold of his greasy head and banged it several times against the floor until I felt him go limp. I was exhausted, deaf, and in a lot of pain. Hey, you sit for an hour with your hands taped behind your back while people slug you in the skull. But I was worried Uberhardt might have found what he was looking for, so I rolled to the side and looked back. Turned out I didn't need to worry. Somebody had killed Christmas. Well, that's what it looked like at first, because Dr. Jochen Uberhardt was sprawled on his back. It wasn't immediately obvious because of the angle and because of his red dressing gown, but he had taken the largest part of Henry's shotgun burst, mostly in his head and upper torso. The doctor was a bloody mess, his beard and face spattered in scarlet, but he was still alive, still breathing. As I crawled toward him, his weird blue eyes followed my movements. I grabbed his cane, a heavy wooden job now lying next to his empty chair. I briefly contemplated beating the rest of the life out of him, but I could hear somebody coming up the stairs toward the main room. I remembered that the other guard, Carl, had been in the lab on the floor below, recovering from the rock I'd laid against his head, so I clambered to my feet and staggered like a George Romero zombie to the doorway. "What the hell's going on down here?" Carl yelled as he came in. "Did you get that?" I didn't have much time to admire the big old swollen bruise I'd put on his forehead as he stopped in the doorway and stared in shock at the groaning, blood-spattered lump that was Uberhardt and the less bloody but more silent lump of Henry. I didn't have time because I was busy swinging that big knob-headed cane of Uberhardt's. You might think it was just a poetic coincidence that I smashed Carl in the same place I'd recently kicked Henry, but really it wasn't. I was getting tired of all this bullshit, and I fucking well aimed for those nuts. If you're going to tie me up and beat the shit out of me and you're not named Exotic Mistress Christina and I didn't pay you to do it, you better not let me get loose again. As he lay writhing on the floor, I gave Carl a couple of more taps on the skull to shut him up because I was getting tired of the sound that guys with crushed gonads retching. Then I went to hunt for my guns, but I couldn't find them in Uberhardt's table or anywhere else in the room. What the doctor had been reaching for was a button that apparently triggered a silent alarm, which meant anyone else on the property would know by now that bad shit was going down. I had no time to waste. I knew a woman and a child were on the premises somewhere, and there might be more guards as well. I stood over Uberhardt, listening to his breathing noises, which sounded like someone trying to drink liquid fat through a straw. I hope it meant that the vicious bastard was dying, as long as he didn't die too fast. "Where are the others?" I asked him. "You said your daughter and a boy. Is that child something to do with Peter Vesich's grandson? Are there any more guards?" "Ich werde," he grunted. "Ich werde dich töten." I dropped out of German for interrogation, so let's just keep it in English. I put my foot on a concentration of blood-oozing holes in his upper chest and leaned a little weight on it. He gasped and coughed bloody froth. "Answer the question, Doc." "No more guards," he wheezed. "But you'll die anyway." "Where are the civilians?" I gave it a little push, just like pressing down the accelerator pedal, and watched tears jump unbidden into his eyes. I wondered how often that had happened. Dr. Uberhardt didn't seem like the sentimental sort. "Where are the woman and the child?" "Upstairs. Door. Off kitchen," he said. Then, to my amazement, he smiled. Bloody mouth and a couple of broken teeth and all. He looked so unfazed I half expected him to spit out a couple of shotgun pellets like Superman. "You're dead, Angel." "Yeah, tell me something new." I briefly contemplated simply blowing the doctor's head off with the remaining shotgun shell, but I didn't know how difficult it was going to be to get into the downstairs lab or whatever was down there. I might need some additional information out of him. Besides, Uberhardt might have been lying about there not being any more guards, in which case saving my buckshot would be a smart idea. I had no idea what time it was either, but I knew I needed to get moving. My guns were lost somewhere in the house, but I had Henry's sawed-off Remington and also his big old knife, which I lifted from his belt because Let's face it, he wasn't going to be doing any whittling anytime soon. I slid the blade into my belt and decided to take the doctor's walking stick as well. Nice to have a non-lethal option when dealing with quite possibly innocent women and kids. The kitchen was just as bizarrely normal as everything else I'd seen, smelling of gingerbread and cinnamon. There was no one on the stairs and no noise from below, but I went up with the shotgun pointing ahead of me and the safety off. I wished I'd had the assault rifle Henry had been carrying earlier, but I didn't have time to look for it. The hallway at the top of the stairs had several rooms, all empty, but one door near the back was locked. I flicked the shotgun safety on so I didn't accidentally blow my own head off, then backed up a couple of steps, lowered my shoulder, and smashed the bolt right out of the door frame. I didn't have much time to take in details. A carpeted room, a beautiful view down the tree-covered hillside beyond the single window. There were toys all over the floor, a desk, a television, and a low table with the remains of a meal on it. Two figures sat huddled on a couch, a fair-haired young woman and a dark-haired boy of about 7 or 8 years old. Then a second woman stepped toward me from behind the door where she had been hiding. She was aiming a pistol at me. "Go away! Get out of here or I'll shoot!" She was an attractive, well-dressed older gal who looked like she could have been dean of a small university. She was trying to sound convincingly dangerous, but it was pretty clear from the one-handed way she was waving the revolver that she didn't use guns very often. I lowered the shotgun and saw her relax a little, or at least the tiny continuous tremor beside her eye stopped twitching quite so badly. "Obviously there's been a mistake, ma'am," I said in my calmest voice. I took a step toward her, gun held high, gun held high so she could see I wasn't pointing it at anything. Then I knocked the gun out of her hand with a walking stick. She just stood there, squeezing her now sore hand and looking scared and unhappy. "Now, who the hell are you?" I asked. "Uberhardt's daughter?" She shook her head and pointed at the blonde woman on the couch. "She is. I'm just the governess." "Then lie down on the rug, Miss Poppins, and put your hands behind your head." As the older woman hurried to obey me, I swiveled the shotgun toward the room's other occupants, but then thought better of it. The woman, squeezed up against the end of the couch, had ratty hair that hadn't been brushed in a while. Her dress was plain and sack-like, something you'd expect to see on a patient in long-term care, not the pampered daughter of a wealthy man. She stared at me, the small boy held tight against her breast. "You," I demanded, "what's your name?" Her blue eyes, big to begin with, got bigger. She looked from the woman on the floor to me, to the shotgun. "Maria," she said in a small, childlike voice. "Right. Maria, are you Dr. Uberhardt's daughter?" She nodded. "And is that child your son?" She looked down quickly, as though to make sure she was still holding the same child, then nodded again. "He's named Fritz." "Of course he is. What's your father running here, a stock company of the Nutcracker? And who is Fritz's father, Maria?" She looked at me blankly, but I thought there must be something else going on behind those large, pale, sky-colored eyes. "Come on, who's the father?" She shook her head. "I don't know." Time was definitely being wasted here. If nothing else, it was going to be dawn soon, and then my friend George was going to be man-body, pig brain, and not much use to me at all. "Okay, enough chat. I need all 3 of you to get up and walk out of here with me. Carry the boy if you want, but get moving. Now." "Where is my papa?" the young woman asked. "He's not coming on this trip. You and your son are." I looked down at the governess, who was trying very hard not to move or look up. "Nanny, you're coming along too. We'll sort it all out later. Now come on." "No!" Maria's voice turned stubborn. "Papa said to go in the room and stay if anything happened. We're in the room. We have to stay." Papa was wrong. "Please stand up. I can't carry all of you." "No!" Maria said loudly. "Papa said stay." I was beginning to think there was something seriously wrong with Uberhardt's daughter. I reached out to take her arm. "Look, I don't care. No! No! Her voice became a shriek as she jerked away from me, her hair in looping tangles over her face like a golden fishnet. You're spoiling Christmas! And then she changed. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. Weirder than watching George go pig to man or man to pig. Because unlike George, who's usually half buried in mud, it all happened in front of me, like a scientific experiment in good light, and I still couldn't figure out what was happening. Because Maria Uberhardt just shifted. Like she was going in and out of focus, but nothing else around her did. And all the changing seemed to happen right where I wasn't looking. It was like watching a nature documentary while peaking on acid. Bam, a bright yellow eye, shadows sliding, teeth, a sudden jagged edge of white fur sticking up like dune grass on a crest, skin sliding into hair, the whole mass of woman shape, wriggling like a butterfly trying to get out of its chrysalis, then bam, 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 legs with claws at the end, a mouth open in a red and white snarl, a growl like someone dragging a tire iron down the slats of a picket fence. Down on the floor, the governess was screaming into the carpet like her mind had snapped. At the other end of the couch, the little boy's eyes were wide, but nowhere near as wide as they should have been because his mama had just turned into a shaggy white wolf right in front of all of us, which meant the boy had probably seen this before. It wasn't a full moon night either, I suddenly realized. We were still in the dark hours between Christmas Eve and Christmas morning, and the moon had been only a sliver. She'd changed because she wanted to change. She leaped. I should have fired, although even the buckshot and the sawed-off shotty probably wouldn't have done any good, but I couldn't. It wasn't just that she was female. I faced woman-shaped things before and had no trouble pulling the trigger. It was the childishness I'd seen in her eyes while they were still human, the confusion and fear that all but shouted victim. I couldn't say why or how, but I knew Maria Uberhardt was not in her right mind. Which, of course, just made things worse. It's bad enough trying to prevent a fanged 200-pound monster from killing you without a head full of sentimental crap stopping you from trying to kill it right back. So all of a sudden, I was on my back under a lot of snarling woman wolf, struggling to keep my face attached to the front of my skull. I think I would have been okay in more normal circumstances. I'm an angel, after all, and I'm trained to fight. I think I could kill a big wolf with my hands if I had to, but I sure couldn't do the same with a mentally ill woman. As we rolled across the floor, I managed to grab Maria by the ears and smack her head hard against a table leg, but it didn't seem to hurt her at all. From the corner of my eye, I saw the governess scramble to her feet and make a run for the door. She left the kid behind. Hey, way to do your job, child care professional. But there wasn't much I could do about it. The boy was still watching, his face more curious than frightened. Oh, crap, I remember thinking. Has the kid already reached the werewolfing stage too? Is he old enough? Because Jochen Uberhardt had looked at least 3 or 4 decades younger than his calendar age, and I had no idea how old his daughter actually was, just that she looked no more than 30. Who could guess? But I sure didn't need a mother and son wolf tag team playing gang pile on Bobby. I rolled her off me for a moment, then grabbed the coffee table and dragged it with me as I scrambled away, dumping crockery and food everywhere as I backed toward the window. The table was almost as long as I was tall, so I pulled it upright, legs outward, to use as a shield, to keep Maria's snapping jaws away from my neck and face. Her son was still watching us fight, but he looked curiously detached, as though we were nothing more than some tense and exciting playoff game. It wasn't exactly clear which team he was rooting for either, which was another kind of weird. No, look out, Mommy. No, get that evil man, Mother dear. Just that expression of worried consideration on his little face, like a card player with a less than great hand. Then he tilted his head like he was listening to something and suddenly called out in a high, worried voice one word that sounded like Hopa or Opa. I didn't have time to wonder about it much, though, because just that moment, the white wolf tried to climb up the coffee table I was holding, using the table legs to scramble over it in an attempt to bite my head off. Her sudden weight made it too much for me to hold, and I stumbled backward with the weight of the table and the wolf pressing down on me. If that already blood-reddened muzzle hadn't been snapping right at my face, I might have realized I was backing toward the room's big window. Lucky for me, I slipped on a toy or something and fell over backward. Unluckily for Maria, she and the table went right into the window, shattering the glass and out into the cold pre-dawn air. It seemed like long seconds before I heard the impact. I crawled to the window and looked down to the distant cement patio. The furry white body lay, twisted, broken, and bleeding from the mouth amid the splintered ruins of the table. I turned back in time to see the boy standing up on the couch now, backed into the corner where two walls met. Something was banging and thumping down the hallway outside. This time he looked right at me and said that word again. Opa! Opa's coming. I guessed it was the German word for grandfather, only about a half a second before the huge gray thing shouldered its way into the small room. Well, shit, was my weary summation. Not so much like an ordinary wolf, this one. Uberhard had changed over all those years into something not quite wolf or man, something big and hairy that stood on two legs. A ragged corpse in a dark, tasteful woman's business suit lay in the hallway behind him, what was left of the governess. I hadn't been planning to apply for a job here anyway, but the severance package clearly left something to be desired. Uberhart, in his aware form, was about a foot taller than me, covered in coarse gray fur ticked with black. The eyes were like little orange jack-o'-lanterns, ablaze with light, but the wolf face was more human than the daughter's, which only made it more horrifying. This was a monster that had haunted people's myths and stories since history began in the darkness of the past. It might have been a mortal man once, much like any other, but hatred and heedlessness and unspeakable selfish greed had created something as close to pure evil as I'd ever seen. I backed away, shotgun in one hand and club in the other. I had not the slightest doubt that I was in very, very bad trouble. Uberhart as man was almost 100 years old, but the were Uberhart looked to be in the peak of health and vigor. The hands were not just paws, but had separate blunt fingers, each ending with a hooked, razor-sharp claw. The head was the size of a holiday turkey and jutted from shoulders nearly twice as wide as mine. And under the stinking, wiry fur, I could see the hard pit bull muscles flexing. If the daughter had weighed a couple of 100 pounds, this monster was at least twice that, and I was already exhausted. The beast looked at the broken window. Scheiß, it said. So you have killed her then, poor thing. I wouldn't have guessed it could speak so clearly past all those teeth. Gott sei Dank, I have still the boy. Otherwise, I would have to start over. As it is, you have nearly destroyed my family and my work. Your family? I didn't think even an angel could just walk away from a 40-foot fall, and Uberhart was between me and the door. What about Peter Vesich? You kidnapped and murdered his grandson and murdered his daughter and her husband? What do you mean, your family? The sawed-off shotgun was still shiny with Maria's wolf spit, but it was also still loaded with its single shell. I leveled the shortened barrel toward him. The fiery eyes flicked toward the gun, then back to me. A smile curled the not-quite-animal mouth. You do realize you might as well throw popped corn at me, Angel? This body is already dissolving the lead pellets that nearly killed my human form. Even high-velocity bullets barely wound me. He sure acted like he was telling the truth. Not that I was going to throw my only gun away, but it meant my self-defense options were probably down to running or begging for my life. I wondered if I could maneuver him away from the door, then get through it before he tore out my spine. What about the boy here? I asked, hoping to distract him, while I sidled a discreet bit to the side. When I moved, though, Uberhardt moved a little also, like a canny old tennis pro playing against a younger opponent. Young Fritz, is he Vesich's great-grandson? A chuffing bark from deep in the monster's throat. A laugh. In a sense, yes. Even God used the clay of the earth to make his creatures, but it does not matter. In all the important ways, he is mine. If you're leading up to explaining why you raped your own daughter for science, I think I'll just blow my own head off now with this shotgun, thanks. Fool. But Uberhardt didn't seem outraged. There was no need for such unscientific Verrücktheit. It was merely a matter of DNA splicing and epigenetic programming. Others are learning to do it now, but when I began so many years ago, let me guess. My finger was sweaty on the shotgun trigger. They called you mad. He smiled. Yes, the wolf thing smiled. It was extremely disturbing watching a mouth not meant for twisting that way. No, they called me a liar. And of course I could not show them my results because of the pointless demonization of human experimentation. He had barely moved, but I was cut off from making a break from the door, making a break for the door. I had no choice except to keep stalling, but Uberhardt had said something that caught my attention. Hold on, you said DNA splicing? You took DNA from Vesich's grandson? Among other things. That laugh again. I really, really wished I had something better than buckshot. A silver-throwing bazooka, maybe. But you can get DNA from a cigarette butt these days, a soda can. Why did you have to kidnap him? Because I didn't need his genetic information when he was human, foolish angel. I needed it after he'd changed. But come, I know you are trying to delay me. You cannot hope to understand what I have done. Not 100 men in the world could manage that. See the boy. See my grandson. He is what I have created. A lycanthrope like me, but capable of passing along the trait with his own genes alone, no matter who the mother might be. You see, my bloodline will live forever. That posterity is far superior than a family name or a fortune or some piece of land. Where the Nazis failed with their childish love of uniforms and marching and their obsession with racial purity, my descendants will forge a 2,000-year Reich. They will be the Wolfenvolk, and the rest of mankind will be their cattle. Oh, my sweet Lord, the crazy was thick in there. But despite the copious villain speak, Uberhardt wasn't completely caught up in his own words. He had already shortened the distance between us. So that's your loving gift to your grandson, is it? You made his grandfather's insanity genetic? What do you think God is going to think about that? God! Uberhardt laughed. A little froth gathered at the corner of his jaw. When I die, long years from now, I am sure God will respect me as an equal. After all, I have done nothing he has not already done. The strong will continue to rule the meek until the end of days, whatever nonsense that charlatan of Nazareth might claim. But now the strong will be my descendants. Without any change in tone, he lunged. I was ready for it, but he still nearly caught me, sweeping at my legs with his long, hairy arm. I knew if I hit the floor for more than a second, he'd be on top of me, pinning me down while he shredded my throat. So I did my best to roll and then bounce up into a crouch. As soon as my feet were under me, I made a ridiculously unlikely attempt to vault right over him. He'd anticipated me, though, and his reflexes were at least as fast as mine. His yellow teeth snapped and caught my pants cuff. It tore away, but the contact also pulled me sideways so that I crashed against the edge of the bed, knocking Uberhardt's grandson onto the floor. A moment later, Dr. Wolfbreath was on top of me, just as I feared, although somehow I had managed to hold onto the shotgun. I had a split-second choice between trying to get my arm free for one last blast from the shotgun, that I seriously doubted would cause him any permanent damage, or doing something else. I chose the something else and shoved the butt of the Remington sideways between his teeth to keep them from closing on my face. It was only a moment's respite. His weight was already crushing the breath out of me. My muscles were nearly limp with fatigue, my lungs squeezed flat inside my chest. As the snout pressed down toward me, ropes of lupine saliva dripping over the shotgun stock, I heard a rumbling I hadn't heard before. For a second, I hoped it was an earthquake and that at least the house might collapse on this evil son of a bitch after he finished killing me. Then I realized it was more likely to be Henry or the other guard hurrying to help their boss. I fought to get out from under Uberhardt, but it took all my strength just to keep the doctor's jaws from my throat. A second or two later, the noise had grown so loud that even Uberhardt paused, orange eyes rolling to the side to see what was happening, his jaws still grinding on the wooden shotgun stock, which was starting to look like an old corn cob. But neither of us was prepared for what happened next. Namely, 800 pounds of angry pork reaching the top of the stairs, accelerating down the hallway, then crashing through the door. Uberhardt and I had only broken the bolt on it and splintered the hinges. The arrival of George Noseda, werehog, blew the thing into matchsticks. High-speed pig hit monster wolf like a diesel freight train at the end of a long downgrade. Both of them skidded across the carpet and smashed a huge dimple in the plasterboard wall like a horizontal meteor crater, but they didn't even seem to notice. I rolled to the side and for about 20 dazed seconds that seemed longer, watched the damnedest fight I'd ever seen. I mean, seriously, if they put that thing on pay-per-view, they could have made millions. Grunting, howling, barking, squealing, spraying blood, over half a ton of meat and bristly hair rolled around the room. But big as he was, and as many gouges as his tusks had already put in Uberhardt's pelt, it was clear to me that George was going to lose this fight. He had size on his side, but the advantage of surprise was gone now, and the tide was starting to turn. George didn't have claws. The Uberhardt wolf did, and even as George pushed him back against the wall, the doctor's dirty talons raked his skins into tendrils of bleeding pork rind. I had to do something, anything, to change the odds. I had a sudden idea and slapped at my pocket for the silver bullet, but felt nothing there. I rolled out of the way again as the cyclone of teeth and tusks threatened to pull me in. But even when I turned my pocket inside out, it was still empty. Peter Vessage's silver bullet was gone, lost in my various struggles. Hope dissolved like snow in bright sunshine. Then I heard a single word above the gasping and snorting of two immense animals locked in a death struggle. Here. I turned. The boy had climbed back onto the couch, but he was holding his hand out. The bullet lay in his palm, nestled like a pearl in an oyster. Here, he said again. For the first time, I saw that young Fritz's eyes had a tinge of yellow around the brown. Do you know what I'm going to do with this? He only nodded. It seemed he spoke English after all. Still waters and all that. I took it from him in turn, letting the silvery cylinder slide down the barrel of the shotgun, a barrel that still contained an unfired shell. Uberhardt was on top of George now, his snout darting over and over again toward George's fat neck, and my friend was squealing in panicked rage. He knew he was going to die. Horrible sound. Never want to hear it again. I didn't bother to make a speech or give Uberhardt a chance to surrender. I'm an angel, not a saint. I just shoved the end of the barrel against the back of the wolf's low, wide head and said, God can decide what to do with you. Then I pulled the trigger. The echoes had gone before the wolf finished twitching. At least I think so, because I couldn't hear very well. The amateur folklorist in me was interested to see that Uberhardt didn't revert back to human form after he died. Just lay there, looking like a big hunk of hairy, dead werewolf. I stood over the body long enough to make sure, but pretty much everything above his lower jaw was gone. I guess he's not going to get that Nobel Prize now, I said. I wanted to laugh or cry, but didn't do either. George didn't reply. I turned, suddenly terrified that I'd been too late, but my friend was struggling up onto his trotters. It looked like someone was trying to launch a crippled Zeppelin smeared with red paint. Jesus, George, I said, are you okay? No te preocupes por mí, Bobby, he told me, then listed a little to one side before getting all his feet under him again. You saved my life, buddy. I looked him over, but despite some awful gouges near his throat and deep scrapes on his belly, none of the wounds seemed life-threatening. I mean that. I was on the way out. All in a day's work, Mr. D. He drooled some blood, then spat to get rid of some more, which took a few moments. He looked over to the boy on the bed, who didn't seem any more upset or frightened than he had before his grandfather's head was blown into sticky specks. Why don't you go find the rest of your clothes? George said to me. I'll talk to the kid. I nodded. That's what I brought him for, after all. The first thing I did was look out the broken window. I was half hoping that poor, crazy Maria Uberhardt would be gone, that she had survived and escaped, but the pale, broken body of the white wolf still lay on the concrete below. We're going to have to take the boy out another way, I decided. Limping and dripping blood, I explored the rest of the house, or at least enough to see that I didn't really want to spend much time on Uberhardt's downstairs lab at all. Just a glimpse made me feel pretty sick. None of the subjects of his experiments were still alive, but there had been plenty of them, now preserved in freezers and formaldehyde. I called him Mengele before, but Mengele was a piker compared to the wolf doctor. When I struggled back to the upper part of the house, I saw that, unlike the doctor's daughter, the two guards had vanished, although not without leaving a lot of their blood dripped and smeared around first. It was okay, since I'd given both of them a few good shots to remember me by. I had no interest in trying to get them sent to jail for aiding a known werewolf or torturing an angel. Even in San Judas, the cops have their limits. I had put my shoes on and was buttoning my shirt, the only things I had now, including my skin and hair that weren't stiff with drying blood, when I got back to the playroom. George was sitting on the floor, talking quietly but intently with a boy who, by his expression, might have been having a very ordinary conversation with a very ordinary human. My friend looked up. Fritz says he won't mind staying with me for a while, until we figure out what's best for him. He needs food, and he needs a safe place to sleep. Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. George gave me a look. Pigs can shame you. Don't think they can't. Geez, Bobby, what were you going to do? Just let him out on a street corner? You're not very good with kids, are you? Well, nobody's ever accused me of it. I looked around me at the unholy mess, most definitely including the large, bestial corpse in the center of the room. But no, I wouldn't have put him on the street. This is Peter Vesic's great-grandson, after all. But I didn't want him to see what was going to happen next. Why don't you take young Fritz out to your trailer, George? I've got a few more things to do here. Okay. George levered himself up onto all 4 feet. He can ride up front with Javier. So Javier came back? He went to take a leak, like you said. He's the one who let me out, but I couldn't sit around anymore waiting to see what happened. I was worried about you, Bobby, and it was getting late. Thanks, George. And I mean that. Anyway, Fritz can ride with Javier. The sun will be up any time now. I wouldn't want to scare him by him seeing me that way. No, of course not. Everybody likes a talking pig. Nobody likes a grunting naked man. Well, you joke about it, but it's true. I know, man. Forgive me. I'm tired. The kid went down the stairs with one hand on George's back, like they were already fast friends. When they were out of the house, I took the cans of gasoline I'd found in the garage. These Nazi hideout people always keep things like that around for their generators in case of the Great Race War. and sprinkled it liberally around the doctor's unpleasant lab, trying not to look at any of the specimens this time. Then, when I could scarcely breathe from the fumes, I took a couple of more cans and soaked the carpets on the stairs all the way to the top floor to make sure that hellhole of a place was burning good and proper before any fire crews arrived. Then I went back for one more can and poured the whole thing over Eberhard's corpse. The doctor from Mauthausen might not have felt he had much in common with Hitler, but I'd seen more than a few similarities, so I thought it was appropriate that their mortal remains disappeared the same way. As we drove the big trailer down the hill, the boy sitting quietly on my lap, watching the trees go past, the rearview mirror showed me the first flames reaching high into the sky behind us, scorching the last hour of night like a bright star over Bethlehem. Heaven was waiting for me. No sooner had I fallen into my own bed no sooner had I fallen into my own bed at about dawn on Christmas morning than I found myself in the dim, strange place we call outside. Ambriel and the soul of Peter Vesich were waiting for me. "Where's my grandson?" the old man demanded even before Ambriel spoke. I looked to the brightness that was the judge, but Ambriel made no sign. So I told Vesich the whole story. When I said that his grandson was buried on the hillside beside the pile of ashes that had been Eberhard's retreat, he wept. Yes, souls can weep. You damn bet they can. "God save his soul. I will never see him again," Vesich said. "He was a good boy. He will be in heaven, and I..." He trailed off, but we all knew what he meant. "But there's more you need to know," I said, and told Peter Vesich about his great-grandson, the descendant he hadn't known he had. I'd hoped it would cheer him, but at first it seemed only to do the reverse. "But what will become of him? Who will take care of him? Oh, merciful God, if you are real, why have you left my great-grandchild alone in the world?" "Actually, he's in very good hands." I thought about how bizarre it would sound if I tried to explain it. "He's with a friend of mine, a friend who understands, a friend who has some of the same problems." "Truly?" Vesich looked like he wanted to believe but couldn't. "I swear to you it's true. On my honor as an angel. On my own soul." The old man looked at me long and carefully. Then he turned to Ambriel and said, "All right, it's enough. I have to trust you all. I'm ready to go, too." He took a breath. "I'm ready to go." The radiance that was Ambriel flared a little. "For the crimes you have committed, hell should be the only proper punishment, Peter Vesich. But you were not to blame for most of the evil you did, and you tried to repair what you could. You are sentenced to 100 years in purgatory. If you continue to show repentance there, I will recommend that heaven accept you when your sentence ends." Vesich's look of astonishment as he faded away was something I can't describe. I was a little surprised myself. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. "That family deserves better than they got." "Many do," said Ambriel. "And now, Delorio, one further matter. From what you have said, your friend, the unfortunate George Noseda, risked his life to save the child. And me, he definitely saved me. George is a good guy." Ambriel was silent for a moment, flickering. "It is beyond my power to undo his curse," she said, "but a small reward is within the discretion of my authority." The fires dwindled a little, and when they blazed back up again, they were brighter, hard to look at straight. "There, it is done. Tell him this will only last until the first hour of the new year, so he should enjoy it while he can. I thought earthly calendars didn't mean anything in heaven, I said. That is so, she said. But sometimes it is good for heaven to be reminded of the bright, brief flicker of earthly lives. Then she was gone, and I was lying in my bed in my own place, aching like a piece of tenderized meat, but with a good feeling inside. That doesn't happen much when I'm dealing with heaven, so it was a nice Christmas present. Later in the morning, after a shower and sleep and enough coffee and breakfast in me to fuel an entire squad of Santa's elves, I drove back up to George's places in the hills. Javier let me in, looking like a man who's just seen Martians land on his lawn, but scuffed and scarred as I was, it wasn't me who put that expression on his face. George stood up as I got to the living room. That was the first amazing thing. George had never been inside his own house as long as I'd known him. But there he was, wearing a terry cloth robe over his bulky form, his bulky human form. Young Fritz sat on the floor beside him, playing with a toy car set that I suspected Javier or someone had just bought that morning at the first open place he could find. There was even a tree in the corner, obviously improvised because it had no lights, and all the ornaments were Christmas cards from local businesses. Still, it looked pretty damn festive. "Look, Bobby," said George, "I'm human. I mean, my human brain is in my human body." "I know, George, and that's great, really." But I trailed off. I hated having to spoil the amazing look on his face with the rest of the story. "But it won't last." "Shoo, Bobby, I know that. I can feel the timer ticking in my head, if that makes sense. I only have a few days of it." But he didn't look very upset about that. "Until New Year's," I said. "That's plenty of time, right, Fritz?" The boy looked up, smiled a secretive smile, and went back to his cars. He was a quiet one, a kid, silent and deep, but of course he'd seen a lot of weird things in his short life. I couldn't help wondering what the rest of his story would be like. "So, what are you going to do, George?" I asked. "You could spend some time in Vegas, drinks, shows, find a woman." I tried to imagine what I'd do if I had my own body back for the first time in decades. "Maybe more than a few women." George spluttered his derision. I'd never seen his big round face with intelligence behind the eyes. He looked like a really nice guy. "Booze and hookers? Come on, Bobby, not in front of the boy. Nah, I don't need that." "Then what?" "What do you think? I'm going to spend time with this little guy here before he goes to live with my cousin Rosa." He ruffled the child's dark hair. "Your Tio Bobby here will keep an eye out for you when I can't, Fritz. He and Tia Rosa will take really good care of you. And you can come visit me anytime you want." "When you're a pig?" the boy asked without looking up. "Of course. I'm usually no fun when I look like this. Is that okay?" "Sure," said Fritz, and sounded like he meant it. "I like you when you're a pig." "Hold up just a second," I said. "Are you really going to take this once-in-a-lifetime chance and spend it at home?" Human George was just as capable of showing disgust as porcine George. "Not even. First, we're going to go out to dinner so I can see what human food tastes like again with a human mouth. Then we'll go down to see the Christmas lights. They keep them up for days. And we'll go to the beach or maybe up to Big Basin to hike. Man, there's a ton of stuff to do, right, Fritz?" And the kid smiled, a real, honest childhood smile. That was it right there as far as I was concerned, the highlight of the whole thing, the reason for the season. "To the beach, Tio George?" he said. "You mean the ocean? The real ocean? Haven't you ever been?" George shook his head. "Heck yeah, the real ocean. And we'll go to the boardwalk, too. Have you ever been on a roller coaster?" I left the big bad pig and the last little wolf discussing how many rides they could fit into an afternoon. I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't needed, and I liked that feeling. So I drove home. The Christmas lights were off, in the middle of the day, of course, and the decorations were looking just a tiny bit bedraggled, but they still looked mighty nice to me. The streets of San Judas were mostly empty, while a good chunk of the populace was home, surrounded by a sea of torn wrapping paper, eating peanut brittle and cookies, and trying to remember where they put the AA batteries. Later, they'd be driving to visit relatives, and the Jewish ones would be out getting Chinese, and me, well, I'd probably be down at the compasses, slamming back a few with the rest of the workaholic angels. For now, though, I was just enjoying the quiet streets and being scraped up and bruised, but not dead. Okay, and enjoying the fact that I'd done something good for someone. I almost felt like putting on some Christmas music. Almost. But of course I didn't. I'm an angel, not a sap. And that's the end of God Rest Ye Merry Gentle Pagan. And it's also a few minutes past 3, so I'm going to close it up for the night and say to you all, thank you very much for joining me and Bobby, who I really miss. I will write more Bobby someday. Once I get done with the current spate of things, I would love to go back to Bobby. I actually have an idea for another book called Forever O'Clock, and I'd like to do single standalones of Bobby because he's a super fun character to write. And for once, I'm not having to think like somebody else because he basically thinks like I do, except I'm not as dangerous as he is, and I'm not as angelic as he is, and I'm not as dead as he is, thank goodness. Anyway, so with that, I will give you my normal and customary closing, which is to please urge you all to be good to yourselves, be kind to others, do your best to make every day a worthwhile one for you and the folks around you. And from our house to your house, I thank you very much for joining me. I will be finishing Child of an Ancient City at 7 p.m. Sunday, my time, Pacific Daylight Time. So that's, a half a day, whatever it is from now. It's coming in the future. So for those of you who can join me for that, I hope you will. And for the rest of you, I hope you'll come back next week. As far as I know, I will be reading, although I don't know what yet. And again, I just want to say thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And as I often said, if I just wanted to be sitting here talking to myself, I can do that with just my family around because they're already really good at ignoring me. So thank you for joining me and have a lovely night.